This is VOA Africa.
Good evening, I'm Esther Gido. It's Tuesday, January 14th. This is Africa 54. Gunfire erupts in Sudan's General Intelligence Service buildings in Khartoum. We'll have a live report. UN aid statistics show Malawi has made tremendous progress in fighting HIV/AIDS epidemic. And Democratic presidential candidates meet for a critical debate Tuesday in Iowa, less than 3 weeks before the presidential nomination process begins. We begin tonight in Sudan, where gunfire rang out Tuesday at two buildings used by the Sudanese General Intelligence Service in Khartoum. Shortly after the gunfire began, the service announced it had fired some employees who were unhappy with the severance package they were offered. A security source says negotiations were taking place to try to resolve the problem. Witnesses say security forces have blocked the road leading to one of the buildings. Masked members of the agency dressed in military uniforms set up checkpoints in one of Khartoum's main residential streets near the building and were seen firing shots into the air. Unverified video footage posted on social media purporting to show the area where the clashes occurred featured sounds of gunfire. Now for more on this developing story, journalist Sanusi Adam joins me live via phone from Khartoum. Good evening, Sanusi.
Good evening, Esther.
What more do we know about this shooting?
We know so far that the shooting has stopped, but the situation has not been resolved. We heard that there's a meeting led by General Al-Burhan, the head of the Sovereignty Council, and to discuss the matter and resolve this issue peacefully. Right now, most of the streets in Khartoum are stable, except for Abed Khatim and near Airport Road. The airport is still closed, and there's also some fire heard across the river in Kafuri.
Now, Sanusi, have we had from the government any official statement so far on what's going on?
Yes, there is. The Minister of Information just issued a statement stating that this has been a rebellion among the National Security Forces, the Division of Operation. This division is known to carry out the war during Bashir regime, but now, because the new formation of the national security, turning the national security to its core mission, which is just gathering information. So this division is being released from duty, and they were offered a package in exchange for their end of service. And this was not what they were expecting, so that's why they started the rebellion.
Yes, Sanusi, you were in close proximity to one of the buildings where the shooting occurred. Quickly tell us what you saw.
I heard the gunshot on the air. I quickly hurried to my car, and on my way to go pick my kids from the school, I saw military cars responding to the gunfire. Hello?
Yes, I'm listening to you.
Yes, I heard military cars responding to the gunfire, and then quickly after that, there were two helicopters, military helicopters, on the air towards the from Soba towards Soba is also one of the areas also witnessed some gunfire. So from Soba heading towards the army headquarters, which is near the national security headquarters.
Right,
the road near the airport that was heading towards the national security was also blocked by RSF and the Sudanese army vehicles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, Sanusi, thank you very much for keeping an eye on that for us. Journalist Sanusi Adam reporting live from Sudan's capital, Khartoum.
Thank you.
Now, France and 5 West African states agreed on Monday to combine their military forces under one command structure to fight a growing Islamist militancy in the Sahel region, with Paris committing an extra 220 troops. French President Emmanuel Macron had called the leaders of Mali, Burkina Faso, Chad, Niger, and Mauritania, known as the G5, to the southwestern French town of Pau to discuss the battle against insurgents in the Sahel. With growing anti-French sentiment in the 5 countries over Paris' handling of an insurgency by Islamist militants that has seen hundreds of their soldiers killed in recent weeks, Macron had warned that he could withdraw French troops without a clear political commitment from them. But after the summit Monday, Macron said the situation had now been clarified. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan says his country will not hold back from, quote, teaching a lesson to Khalifa Haftar if his eastern Libyan forces continue its attacks against the internationally recognized government in Tripoli. Erdogan made the comments on Tuesday after Turkey and Russia failed to convince Haftar on Monday to sign a binding truce to stop his 9-month assault to seize the Libyan capital. Henry Ridgewell has more on the conflict.
Libya's divisions remain stark. It has rival administrations heavily armed and each backed by an increasing number of foreign powers. In the east, strongman Khalifa Haftar's forces are cementing their grip on the city of Sirte, which they captured a week ago. Haftar launched an offensive last April against the Tripoli-based UN-backed Government of National Accord under Prime Minister Fayez Sarraj, but there are renewed hopes for peace. The two sides agreed to a ceasefire beginning Sunday. For Ankara, the intervention is about regional preeminence, says analyst Claudia Gazzini.
They want to, of course, avoid a full triumphant march of Haftar and his forces into Tripoli and a political reset that would be completely in favor of Haftar, which by extension would mean in favor of the Egyptian, Emirati, Saudi worldview, countries with which Ankara has already difficult relations.
Turkey also hopes to shore up a deal struck with the Tripoli government, purportedly delineating maritime boundaries in the Mediterranean,
which Turkey hopes to use to foil attempts by Egypt, Israel, Cyprus and Greece to export gas from the Eastern Mediterranean to Europe.
Haftar's forces have denounced Ankara's intervention as a Turkish occupation. Gazzini says there is a risk that Turkey's intervention makes peace less likely.
Whereby Turkey offers support to the Tripoli-based government, and this actually enables the Tripoli-based government and the multiple political and military figures around it to adopt a more hardline, uncompromising position and refusing negotiations or refusing a ceasefire.
For now, the ceasefire appears to be holding. Russian, Turkish and Libyan officials from both factions met in Moscow Monday, and Berlin has announced plans to host a Libya peace conference later this month. Turkey's president insisted Monday his intervention is aimed at securing a resolution.
God willing, with the work in Berlin, we will place this ceasefire on solid foundations.
Peace has eluded Libya since the overthrow of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. While efforts towards a resolution move forward, analysts warn there is a danger that more foreign intervention could simply entrench divisions. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
Democratic presidential candidates meet for a critical debate Tuesday in Iowa, less than 3 weeks before Iowa voters kick off the presidential nomination process on February 3rd. A total of 6 Democratic contenders will be on stage, with signs of growing tensions among some of the candidates. VOA national correspondent Jim Malone has more from Washington.
our next president, Joe Biden.
Among those on stage Tuesday will be the current Democratic frontrunner in national polls, former Vice President Joe Biden. Biden is focused on national security in light of recent events with Iran.
That's why it's so important to elect someone who's already ready on day one when they're elected to pick up the pieces. To pick up the pieces of this disarray and immediately be a commander-in-chief of our armed forces.
Biden faces a strong challenge in early voting states like Iowa and New Hampshire, especially from Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. One recent poll shows Sanders leading in Iowa.
And when you live paycheck to paycheck, it's not just that you can't afford decent housing or decent car. It's the stress of trying to survive every day and not knowing next week whether you'll be able to put food on the table or pay the light bills.
It's going to take big structural change.
Tensions are on the rise between Sanders and some of the other contenders, including Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren. Warren has slipped a bit in recent polls, but remains a strong factor in Iowa and New Hampshire.
You know, I was disappointed to hear that Bernie is sending his volunteers out to trash me. Democrats need to unite our party, and that means pulling in all parts of the Democratic coalition.
Sanders has denied targeting Warren. Another strong contender in the early voting states is former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Buttigieg is focused on national unity.
It calls for a different kind of patriotism and commitment to national security, a love of country that begins with the knowledge that our country consists of people, and you cannot love a country if you hate half of the people in it. I'm talking about something better.
Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg has not qualified for the debates, but he has moved up in the polls after a massive television ad blitz in hopes of competing in primaries in March.
I know how to create jobs and build businesses, not because I played a business leader on a TV show, but because I've actually been one in real life.
The race in Iowa appears to be wide open at the moment, says analyst John Fortier.
So I think the race is fluid, but there's a clear front runner with Joe Biden. Unless he gets knocked off his horse in the early contests, he looks pretty strong.
The pace of campaigning will intensify over the next few weeks as voters in Iowa and New Hampshire get ready to render some early judgments on the candidates. Jim Malone, VOA News, Washington.
Now, for more on tonight's debate, I'm joined live via remote from Iowa by Philip Crowther, an international reporter with Associated Press. Hello, Philip. Please wrap it up for us. What makes the debate, this one tonight, different from others that we've seen in the last few months?
Well, it's the 7th out of a grand total of 12 debates, and it's the very last one before the caucuses here in Iowa, of course. What you'll see here on stage, a big difference to those other debates of which we've seen so many already, fewer candidates on stage. Just the 6 were able to qualify for this one. And what you'll also see on stage is a lack of diversity, which Democratic voters won't necessarily identify with, because those 6 candidates, all of them are white, 2 of them are female candidates. That's a long way away from the most diverse field in the history of the Democratic Party that the party was so proud of. Another thing that you'll see here that will be different to the last few times around is we do expect the sparks to fly between 2 candidates who had not been attacking each other on stage so far. Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are expected to have to speak out about that dispute that they've been having over the last few hours based on a CNN report that says that Bernie Sanders had told Elizabeth Warren in a private meeting between the two in 2018 that a woman could not win in 2020. Bernie Sanders says he never said that. Elizabeth Warren said he did. They will have to respond to that on stage. Sparks could fly here at Drake University in Des Moines.
And that's why we will have you again tomorrow to wrap it all for us on what happens tonight. Thank you so much, Philip. Philip Crowther, an international reporter with Associated Press, Global Media Services. And we'll be right back after this break. Officials in Guinea say 2 people were killed in protests on Monday. Authorities say they have launched an investigation into the death of 1 youth in Conakry, and the other death was reported to have been in the opposition stronghold of Labe. Protesters in Labe ransacked a tribunal building and set it on fire, while the opposition says police destroyed their party headquarters. In weekly protests that began last October, tens of thousands of people marched to demand that President Alpha Conde not seek another mandate by changing the constitution. Riot police were deployed throughout the city to break up pockets of protesters who set up barricades all over the capital. Conde's second and final 5-year term expires next year. In 2003, then-Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo signed the Child Rights Act into law to preserve the rights of children and protect them from exploitative labor. But 17 years later, millions of Nigerian children still take on physically challenging work to earn money to survive or support their families. Ifyok Etang reports from Jos, Nigeria.
13-year-old Awal Abdullahi and his friend are pushing this broken-down car, trying to get it to start. He has been learning how to repair cars in this workshop for the past 3 years.
I know how to repair power steering, patch tires, repair stereo and jack up cars. Many times I get exhausted by the work and the sun makes it even more tiring.
Abdullahi's parents don't make enough money to take care of him and his 6 siblings, but he's glad to be able to provide for himself.
I earn about $1 a day. Even when I get it, I don't spend it. I go and save it in my piggy bank so that when I need it, I use it.
There are more than 20 boys below the age of 18 working here, many of whom don't go to school and work full-time as apprentice mechanics. Their employers say they are not subjecting these children to child labor. They say they take care of these children like they would their own.
When we close, we give them some change to eat, at least to buy soap, to wash their clothes. At least they are living fine from there. Instead of being at home, doing nonsense, playing bad play, they're going to be picking dirty things in the dustbin. So we encourage them so that they will encourage the ones at home so that they will join, they learn this work because the work is good.
Other children like Abdul Multalif and his brother Yusuf have to beg on the streets to provide for their daily needs.
Honestly, I don't want to beg. I wish to get some money to buy sweets and chocolates to do business.
In 2003, President Obasanjo signed the Child Rights Act to protect the interests and rights of the Nigerian child. But legal experts Ibrahim Qasim says various factors are preventing the law from being fully enforced.
Unfortunately, in this part of the world, poverty and illiteracy and cultural belief, religious prejudices, these are some of the reasons that has actually affected, the efficacy of the Child Rights Act implementation in Nigeria.
The International Labour Organization says that 43% of Nigerian children are involved in various forms of child labor, despite international conventions banning it. Experts say until the ban is fully implemented, many Nigerian children will never be able to enjoy the joys of childhood. Ifyok Etang for VOA News, Jos, Nigeria.
It's time for our health segment, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu with news on air pollution-related deaths.
That's right, Esther. In a new report released by the Global Alliance on Health and Pollution, researchers are sounding the alarm on the deadly impact of pollution. It is one of the leading worldwide causes of death. However, it's a neglected issue across the globe, despite the enormous toll. VOA's Steve Baragona has more.
Dirty air and water, lead poisoning, and polluted workplaces killed an estimated 8.3 million people in 2017. That's more than smoking. It's more than alcohol and drug abuse. It beats unhealthy diets, major infectious diseases, and war. but it gets less attention than any of those in much of the world. That's according to a new report by the Global Alliance on Health and Pollution, which includes researchers, national health ministries, NGOs, and the United Nations. Rachel Kupka is executive director.
It's pointing out that a global health crisis is in fact still undercounted, still underaddressed, still under-resourced.
The report says pollution from traditional sources like smoky cook stoves and poor sanitation are declining, while modern pollution from factories, vehicles, and toxic chemicals are on the rise. Kupka notes that international investment has focused on traditional pollution.
Water and sanitation, like I mentioned, has had a lot of investment in it, so the deaths are coming down, whereas the other issues in terms of modern pollution have not received the same or equivalent amount of resources and attention.
India and China had the most pollution-related deaths, followed by Nigeria, Indonesia, and Pakistan. The United States was 7th.
There's countries from almost every region of the world present in that top 10 list. So we really are all impacted. It doesn't matter kind of where you are.
Air pollution was the leading killer, making up 40% of the global death toll. Kupka says the good news is that measures already exist that can help reduce the impacts.
There are cost-effective things that countries can do, that communities can do, that cities can do to implement and bring down their burden of disease from pollution.
Authorities can adopt and enforce emissions controls for vehicles and smokestacks, require personal protective gear for workers, and other measures already in place in many countries. Steve Baragona, VOA News.
Turning now to the HIV epidemic, the United Nations AIDS Agency says in 2019, AIDS-related illnesses were the leading cause of death among 15 to 49-year-old females. In sub-Saharan Africa, 3 in 4 new infections among 10 to 19-year-olds are among girls. UNAIDS statistics show that Malawi has made tremendous progress in fighting the HIV/AIDS epidemic. However, women and girls remain disproportionately affected. I sat down with Harry Madukani, program manager of the Coalition of Women Living with HIV and AIDS of Malawi. Some of the issues related to the high rate of HIV infection among women and girls were discussed.
We are a network of women and girls living with HIV. And currently we have about 25,000 women and girls living with HIV as our members. These are women and girls that have disclosed their status. Of course, there are many more that have not yet disclosed. So we have a number of programs that we implement: economic empowerment, nutrition, gender, but of special interest is the sexual and reproductive health and rights.
When we look at the big picture when it comes to the HIV/AIDS epidemic over the years, we've seen that women and girls have been one of the most vulnerable groups. Talk to us about what kind of impact you've seen.
For sure, a lot of awareness has been done, but I must mention that most of the awareness has been focused on women and girls from rural areas. So if you go to the rural areas, and you interview women and girls through support groups, which are our entry points, they have very much knowledge about HIV and AIDS. There is a lot of behavioral change and also increase in the uptake of services, use of condoms, family planning, and even prevention of mother-to-child transmission. There is a lot of progress now. In terms of early infant diagnosis, we are having a lot of children who are getting out of the EID without being infected. But the HIV prevalence rate is still very, very, very high in the cities and even in the towns.
Why?
The health-seeking behavior is still very low, especially among men. But at least we have made some inroads, especially for men in rural areas, using what we call the male champions approach, male engagement, whereby you bring men together through the support groups and what we call male spaces only. But it's really very, very difficult to get men in cities, to get them together and even tell them about HIV and AIDS. That's why our programming now, we want to focus on the elite, especially men who belong to the elite class, because these are the ones that we feel we really need to target if we are to make an impact in terms of HIV prevention.
Because men in the elite class tend to do what?
So what happens with men in the elite class, these are men who have got the money,
yes,
And you see that a lot of girls who are our beneficiaries, especially teenage girls and young women, they prefer to be in a relationship with men who have got the resources, who have got the money, because they feel they can support them financially. So what happens is, if you have, if I may give an example, if you have got one man who is HIV positive and he has got the resources, he has got the monies, the possibility of infecting many women, the possibility is very high, because most of these men tend to have more than one sexual partner.
So now, Harry, talk to us about where things stand with your program.
Currently, we are trying to intensify what we call HIV and the HR integration. This means that when a girl, a woman living with HIV comes to access health services, they are supposed to get all the services under one roof or in one room. Okay. For instance, if a woman living with HIV comes for cervical cancer screening, and we discover that they have to also go for viral testing, our aim is to make sure that they get all these services at the same time, within the same place, in the same room. Because we have discovered that if we refer them or tell them to come another day, we sometimes end up losing them in the process. Yeah. So the integration is, I think, the way to go now if we are to intensify fighting against HIV.
Now, despite the challenges, the good news is, according to UNAIDS 2019 data, Malawi is on track to achieve the UNAIDS 90-90-90 targets by 2020, this year, which include 90% of people with HIV knowing their status, 90% of these accessing ARVs, and 90% of those on treatment being virally suppressed. Back to you, Esther.
Thank you, Leno. Thank you for watching Africa 54. Good night.